accounting, investment, or other similar expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional should be sought. Hello and welcome back, everyone, to The Road to Financial Freedom, a podcast that allows experts to share their stories and secrets to unlocking their financial independence. This podcast is brought to you by CamaPlan, a self-directed IRA administrator in Ambler, PA, that focuses on educating investors with different ways to grow their retirement savings faster through alternative investments. And once again, we're still recording our podcast remotely. I'm Jess Jones, CamaPlan team member and your podcast host. Today, we're taking another stop along our journey to financial freedom, as many of the investors we have heard from on this podcast have gotten their start through a very particular asset, which is real estate. With its varying types and wide range of benefits, it's no wonder that real estate is one of the most popular alternative investments that people choose to invest in, especially with a self-directed IRA. But if you're someone who's just starting out and you aren't as familiar with the ins and outs of the real estate world, all of these options and details can be pretty hard to wrap your head around. Additionally, investing in this asset type with a self-directed IRA comes with its own set of rules. And if you have the right tools and knowledge, real estate investing can actually result in growing retirement income that is fast and easy for you, which is why we're taking the time today to sit with CamaPlan's own Donna Iannuzzi. Donna is a long-standing member of our operations department and has helped thousands of clients navigate real estate transactions of all kinds, so she's very familiar with all the steps and strategies for purchasing, holding, and selling real estate through a self-directed IRA. Thanks for joining us today, Donna.
Thank you. It's nice to be here with you.
Of course. So we'll just get started. I mean, you've been in our operations department for a while. You've seen a ton of real estate transactions come in and out of our company. So let's start with, real estate's one of the most popular alternative assets that, as I mentioned before, but this definition expands beyond just what I think of when I first hear real estate as, a single family home. So
Right.
What are some of the various types of real estate assets that you've actually seen people invest in, especially with their self-directed IRAs?
So, of course, the single family home is the most popular, but you could also purchase condominiums and duplexes. Some people will invest in commercial properties, raw land, and actually a lot of people will invest in international properties.
Oh, cool. So international properties could be anything like a single family home, but in
Single family home,
Europe.
right? Because they're all going to be rentals, so it's basically an investment, and you're going to rent that property out. So, but you can also do that internationally as well.
Yeah, that's cool. I don't know why I didn't put two and two together, but I, for some reason, just didn't think you could do that as internationally. So that's pretty cool. Are there any, specifics to quickly kind of divert off of that, are there any specifics to international investing that people need to know about? Maybe we can touch on that a bit later, but is there
Right.
anything that investors should be aware of if they're investing in something overseas?
Well, of course, all of the properties you can't use yourself, unfortunately, but you can't use it as a vacation home. The biggest thing I would say for anybody investing in an international property is at the end of the year, we always need a fair market value of those properties. So you have to be able to obtain that value so that we can value the account at the end of the year. So that's one thing that is very important. Other than that, it's going to work the same way as if you bought a single family home here in the US.
That's cool.
Strictly an investment. You can't live in it. You can't work on it. You can't vacation there, unfortunately, but it will work the same way as if you bought something here in the US.
Got it. Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. So to backpedal a little bit, can you explain each step in this real estate purchasing process and what it looks like for a typical client going through this kind of transaction?
Sure. So you want to go out, right? You'll find the property that you like, have the realtors draw up a sales contract. Of course, it's going to be all written up in the IRA name. So that would be your CamaPlan for the benefit of Jess Jones's IRA. And you'll always review the documents first, initial them, send them over to Cama, and then we're going to sign off on behalf of your IRA. So it's going to work the same way as if you were going out personally to buy a property. It's just that you have one extra step because CamaPlan has to be involved because we're always going to sign the documents on behalf of your IRA. But the first step would be to have your realtor write up that sales contract. We'll get that signed off. If you require a deposit, CamaPlan would send that deposit out for you, and then we'll wait for the closing. Then when the closing rolls around, we're going to do the same thing. They would draw up a title company, is going to draw up all of your paperwork. We can go over all the different forms involved in that. And then Cama will send out the money for you, sign all the documents, and the property is now held in your IRA account.
Cool. So yeah, that you kind of answered one of the questions that came up for me when I was thinking of questions to ask you about these types of transactions is there any other ways other than titling that investing through a self-directed IRA versus investing personally causes this process to differ at all?
Well, of course, since you're buying it through your IRA,
Hmm.
you cannot be, obviously, you can go out, you can find the property, choose things for it. But of course, you can't work on it. You can't work on it. Your spouse can't work on it. Sometimes, I have somebody say, oh, well, my husband's a carpenter. So once I buy the property, I'm going to have him come in and do all of the repairs. Well, you're not allowed to do that, right? So there's
Hmm.
certain people that cannot do the work on the property that are per the IRS guidelines. But everything else would kind of work the same way. But you would hire a contractor to do all of the work, and all the bills get paid through the IRA. So you just have to be hands off. Like, again, you can make the decisions, but you just can't go in there and actually do the work.
Got it. All right. Yeah. So that definitely clears it up because I know I've spoken to people before who, may have been trying to learn about the self-directed option, but
Right.
have come into the problem of, oh, well, my husband's the contractor. Where does that come
Right.
in? So people can certainly, I guess, invest personally in those sorts of things if they want to be more hands off. But, based on what you're saying, it sounds like, self-directed real estate investing is definitely a more hands off experience.
Hands off. Correct.
Yeah. And it
Correct.
has to be just per
And it
IRS.
has to be.
But
Right. Right. Right.
yeah. So that definitely clears it up a little bit. So you touched on the fact that the title company is going to draw up a number of documents that go into making sure a closing goes smoothly. And if you actually can just answer also, for someone like me, I hear
Mhm.
closing and I literally think of a door closing and I think, oh, that's got to be the theatrical part of me is like, oh, that must be the end of the process. But the closing actually
Right.
comes at the end of the purchasing process, but it's kind of the beginning
Right.
of owning this asset in an IRA. Do I have that right? Or,
Correct.
can you explain like
Right.
what exactly a closing is, what happens there, and then we can go into documents?
Sure, sure. So at the closing, that's when all of the documents come through. There'll be a settlement statement, which is also called a HUD. And now today, they have closing disclosures and ALTAs. That's going to say what the purchase price of the property is, any of the expenses. If you gave a deposit earlier, that'll get deducted from your cost. That'll be all of your cost to buy that property. At the closing table, that's when CAMA is going to send your money over and purchase the property. Now it's in the IRA name. And we can go over some of the other documents. Of course, the deed would then be written up in your IRA, in the IRA titling. We send over the funds. Now the property is now owned by the IRA.
Okay, gotcha. Are there any other documents that, go into this process, or is that pretty much it? Alta, HUD,
For the
deed?
closing, the basic ones, if people ask, I mean, the at the very least, CAMA would need to see a copy of the deed and have that closing statement. But you also, if you get title insurance, there'll be a copy of the title policy.
Mhm.
And then any other documents, there could be some affidavits that the title company draws up. So it just depends. It can also be an attorney that may be drawing up the documents and handling the closing. So everyone has their own documents, but basically those are the main ones.
Okay. And is it also kind of up to the client to choose if if they work with a title company or an attorney, or does it kind of matter what type of asset it is? I'm just curious as how does that get chosen if you've experienced clients picking a attorney versus title company, this and that?
Right. Generally, it's with a title company. Of course, some clients can choose attorneys, and I believe in certain states, an attorney has to be working with them during the
Okay.
closing. So I think it definitely can depend on the state in which you're purchasing the property. If they do the international, a lot of times I see that going through an attorney.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
going to be another question for me too. It's like, so if it's dependent on state, I guess country also has its
Country as well. Right,
yeah,
right,
has its
right.
specific rules.
And then,
Okay.
of
So
course,
that
all the money will definitely flow through that account, right? So it'll
mhm.
flow through either the title company, the money gets wired directly to the title company, or the attorney's account, and then they disperse from there.
Mhm. So, Donna, what happens? And I'm kind of going off script here and asking
That's
a
okay.
question that's come up just based on what you're saying. What happens to this documentation, and what's the process like if the name on the deed or titling on the deed has to change for whatever reason? You know, someone passes away, that property's in their IRA. How does that
Mhm.
necessarily work in terms of if a property becomes it's a subject of okay, someone else is inheriting it?
So you're saying once it's purchased and it's in this CamaPlan name, that person passes and it needs to go to someone else, correct?
Right, like a beneficiary or something like that.
Okay. So the title company, again, will just draw up the new deed going from the original owner and transferring the title to the new person. They would have to go then get that recorded again in the county. And that copy would come back if the person was a CAMA client, that copy would come back to CAMA and we would hold that deed in our files.
Okay, so it's kind of similar. And how long typically does this process take? Is it I know, sometimes people call in and they've got deals that, have just come on the market and they want to get it done very
Right.
quickly or, how like on average how long do you see this process typically take for you?
To actually do the purchase, you're saying, to go through the purchase is,
Yeah, typically like from first contact with, hey, at CamaPlan, I have this property I'm interested in purchasing in my IRA to closed and it's in the client's IRA.
right. Well, some can happen within a week or two.
Mhm.
Some of them, they will put they'll have the sales contract agreement signed and ready to go, and it may take a month or two because title searches or different things hold up the purchase. But I have seen them go through within a week or two. As long as we have the documents that we need, the account is funded here at CAMA. So maybe that's another part too. If someone is just opening the account with CAMA, you want to make sure that your account is funded with enough money to cover the purchase price, of course, but then any renovations or any expenses that may come up on the property later on. So you want to be sure that your account has enough money, and that's one thing that I have run into at times.
Mhm.
Um, Once the IRA has purchased the property, you have to remember that all of the expenses have to be paid by that IRA. So you don't want to run short because you can't mix in personal money. That's a no-no.
Right. And is that probably one of the most common, for lack of a better word, mistakes that you've seen investors make? Or are there other ones that you've seen? What are some of
Um,
what can people do basically to avoid those mistakes and then make sure that their purchases are executed correctly and efficiently after that? So, kind of a two-parter question. What are the
right,
mistakes and how
right.
do they fix it?
Right. Well, again, with the funding, sure, if you have funds from another IRA or you're able to make a contribution for the year, if you run a little short on funds and you're able to transfer money in from another custodian or add to your account by a contribution, you can certainly do that. However, at times people don't have that money to go back to. So that's where you really need to figure out what the purchase price is, how much you're going to need in renovations. Now, the other thing on that side is that you may have a renter right away, and that's great because now you'll have that rental income, which should definitely offset the expenses that you have. But in the event you don't have a renter right away, or it falls through and you're without rental income for a few months, you want to be sure that you've got some backup money to take care of those expenses. So that's one that doesn't. I do see that occasionally. It's not that big of a problem though. And your second part of your question was
No worries. How, I think you kind of cover it with making sure that, planning ahead and making sure that you have the proper funds to purchase a property and to cover, any
right.
expenses that have to come through for that property within your IRA. So, are there any other ways, making sure what are some of the things that you've seen, like even in the real estate process or purchasing process that you've seen like common mistakes, whether it comes to titling or this and that? Like, what do you
Right.
recommend? I know we can't really technically give any advice here, but in terms of, strategies to recommend to folks to avoid holdups in their purchasing processes, like what are some of the ways to make sure that a purchase can be executed as quickly and efficiently as possible?
Right. I guess the number one thing is the paperwork. A lot of times the titling does not come through correctly, so you just want to be sure that that's done. The funds are in place. If you are maybe partnering with someone, so maybe your IRA does not have enough money for the purchase, so you can certainly partner. You can actually partner with yourself or a spouse. And you want to make sure, though, that once that happens and the purchase has been completed, again, all of the expenses then and rental income is going to go along the percentage of ownership. So sometimes that can be an issue when they're structuring the deals. But as long as, your IRA is 50% owner and maybe you put in 50% personal money, as long
Mhm.
as you follow the rules and follow the percentage of ownership as far as expenses and income are concerned, you're okay. At times people will say, well, I'll just add in a few extra dollars to this. Well, no, you really can't do that. It's
Mhm.
definitely got to follow those lines or else you're creating a prohibited transaction.
Right. And does it have to be at least 50% your IRA in order for it to be a transaction?
Yeah, no, it could be anything that you want, right? You could have,
Okay.
yep, two people partnering, or three people, it could be 10%. It doesn't matter. It's just you want to follow those rules.
Right. And so it's all kind of written into the documentation then, because I know I've seen when I used to sort mail and bring you all of these documents, I remember seeing sometimes up to like 5 names on these title paperwork or on this title paperwork, but some of it was like John Smith or Jane Doe's, like in the name of CamaPlan, Jane Doe, FBO Jane Doe, IRA administrator. So like it was Jane's IRA, but John was her husband that was partnering, but he didn't necessarily have an IRA. So I,
Correct. And
I
you can
see
do
what
that.
you're saying. Yeah. So
Great.
it doesn't really, it's not, there aren't strict rules in terms of how much your IRA has to invest in order to hold a portion of the property in the IRA. So how does it,
Correct.
I guess that brings up another question is how does it work if you're partnering with someone else in terms of how the assets distributed or titled or things like that in terms of how is the real estate asset held in someone's IRA if they aren't the full 100% owner of it?
Well, so say you have three people in the deal, so the IRA is maybe 30% owner. It's just that
Mhm.
the deed will read CamaPlan for the benefit of Jane's IRA, 30%, and it'll list the other people on that deed as well. So it's
Okay.
very
Mhm.
clear who owns what portion of that property. Now, when that happens, CAMA certainly can pay the expenses and do all that for you, but maybe at that time, people will hire a property manager to manage the account because now you've got a PICO bill that comes through and everybody owes its portion of that bill. It becomes a little cumbersome. So
Mhm. Mhm.
that's a good time that maybe you get a property manager and then they will accept all of the payments and they'll pay out the bills from there. But again, everybody has to pay proportionate to their ownership in that property.
Got it. Okay. So it's like every payment that comes in, like you're saying, a PICO bill would be, if my IRA owns 30% of what's on the deed, that's what's been written up in the paperwork. I pay 30% of the PICO bill.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
And at times, that's a little cumbersome. Like I said, if you have three or four
Oh yeah.
people owning the property, Pico doesn't want to get four checks, so you
Right.
can bind them all, right? So, yeah, but so that's probably that part. People have to be a little careful with because again, you can't just say, "All right, well, I'm going to pay for this," and then this person's going to pay for this part. You really can't do it that way. You really should split it up so it's clear. And the same thing with the income. Sometimes people will say, I want to make this investment with my IRA and I have enough money to do the whole purchase, but maybe I want to see some of that income come back into my pocket personally. So what they'll do is partner with themselves personally and then say they get, $1,000 of rental income a month, 500 will go back to the IRA and 500 will go into their personal pockets so they can use that money now.
Got it. Well, thank you. That really clears up a lot because I know, I mean, honestly, I've talked to you so many times on the phone. I've transferred you so many phone
Right.
calls and sent you so much mail. But honestly, I don't think I really knew too much about just how specific some of the breakdown can get on this
Right.
paperwork. So I think that really helps contextualize it for me, at least. I hope our listeners will definitely, especially if there's someone like me, they'll be like, oh, that makes a lot more sense.
Right. Hope that helps. I hope that helps.
Oh, for sure. You always are someone that I can go to in the office when I'm like, Donna, I don't get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're not only helping the clients, you're helping all of us here at Gamma too, Donna.
Perfect. Good to hear.
So you mentioned getting property managers for things like, when titles get cumbersome and income and payments have to be made and how that all gets distributed and things like that. So some of the players in real estate purchases you've brought up, it's you, a title company, realtors, attorneys, IRA administrators. What are some of the roles, or what are the roles that each person plays, and when do they get involved in the purchase? I know you've kind of touched on this before, but if you can
Mhm.
break the rules down a little bit so that there's a definition almost to a lot of them, I think that would also help kind of contextualize, when a property manager would be useful, the way you kind of just described a property manager. But some of these things like title company versus attorney versus realtor, like how do they all play into this process?
So the realtor is probably the first person that we are in contact with because they're helping the person obviously find the property and they're going to draw up that sales contract for them. Now, if you have an attorney, a lot of times he'll do that as well. But the realtor, I would say, is the first person that we're in contact with. Then, as the process goes on, and either that agreement gets accepted, or maybe someone bids higher and the client loses the property, we're still dealing with the realtor as far as signing docs with them. Once it gets closer to the settlement, then the realtors start working with the title companies or the attorneys, and that's when we get involved as well because maybe we need to get certain company docs over to them to let them know who we are and who can sign on behalf of the IRA. But at that point, I'm involved or whoever we're involved with the client, the realtor, and the title company just to get this to the closing and make sure that we have all the documents in order, the signing people in order afterwards, or they can kind of do this while they're purchasing the property. In the meantime, the clients could go out if they decided to get a property manager and they could go and get that set up. The property manager would have to set up like a bank account somewhere else just for this property and have good, obviously, record keeping of any money coming in and going out for this property. So they can kind of do that simultaneously. But basically, we're all working together until
Right.
this goes to closing. Once it goes to closing, then it's probably back to the client and CAMA to work together on bills and those types of things.
Got it. So that helps, I think, me understand a lot of the players and their roles and when they kind of come
Jump
into
in, right?
the process. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So thank you for that. The question I have, I guess, now kind of relates to something you already have touched on in terms of, the IRS has some pretty strict rules when it comes to who is allowed to work on a property, who's allowed to live in it if it's owned within your IRA. So
Right.
you've explained some of the rules and how they operate with the properties held in a self-directed IRA, but is there anything additional that, besides you can't work on it, you can't live in it, that people should know when it comes to IRS regulations within an IRA and owning real estate within it?
So it's basically, you, your spouse, your children, your parents, your grandparents are disqualified. So it's great. You got this beautiful property, vacation home, but none of those people can use that. So you can't go down and work on it. You can't stay in it. You can't even, you're not really even supposed to be there overnight, right? So you can't use that. And that would go for anyone that the IRS deems disqualified people from doing transactions with you. And the same thing, you would have to hire a contractor to do the work. They go, they pick out the materials, and you would have to pay them to do all the work on the property. So that's another thing that because people don't realize that you really can't go and use that. Or like I said in the beginning, hey, my husband's a contractor and he's going to go do the work on the property. Well, he's not allowed to. You
Right.
have to actually hire someone and pay them because now your IRA is getting a specific benefit for you having someone close to you that could do the work for next to nothing.
Got it.
So, yeah.
So in terms of partnering then, if you're partnered with, say your own personal funds, even though a portion of that property is owned with your personal funds, it would still count as a benefit toward your IRA, right? So like the regulations kind of apply regardless of the percentage that's owned with your IRA, or is that when it gets kind of dicey? If it's even if it's not just personal finances, if you're partnered with your husband, he's the contractor, where does that line get drawn, I guess?
Oh, so if you're asking, so even if say your IRA was only 10% owner of the property,
Hmm.
he still can do no work or still live in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
No
So like
matter
the
no
rules
matter the
always
percentage of
apply.
ownership, correct. The
Hmm.
rules always apply. If your IRA is 5% owner of that property, those rules still apply because the IRA is involved in the purchase. Yeah,
Okay, got it. So it's kind of just like, at that point, at any level, your IRA is receiving a benefit. So
correct.
don't do it.
Don't do it. You do not want to do that. No.
Exactly. Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, that helps contextualize it for sure. I'll be sure to keep all of my relatives out of it if I own any real estate with my IRA. So in terms of how, and we talked about, payments coming in, income from rentals on a property, or payments leaving the IRA, how are
Mhm.
things paid during each of the steps in the purchasing process? I know we've mentioned deposits a couple of times, but
Right.
how do deposits work for this process?
So that will be detailed when you get the sales contract. So at that time, when we're signing the sales contract, they will either require that deposit or not. If they do, then obviously we have a form for our clients to fill out, the asset purchase directive. They would send that in and say, could you sign a copy of this contract and send out $500 to the title company? So that's determined at that time. I would say probably 60% of them require deposits. Some do not. But, if so, that's when we would do that, send that money out. And then once they get everything together and we're ready to go to closing, we're going to do the same thing. Once we get all those documents, the final settlement sheet comes in with all of the expenses on there. We will then send the remainder of the funds out at that time.
Got it. What's the difference between a settlement and a closing? Is there
That's
a
pretty much the same
difference?
thing.
Same
Yeah,
thing?
no,
Okay.
that's pretty much the same thing. Yep. The settlement or
Gotcha.
the
Okay.
closing. Yep, same
These
thing.
are a lot of these are definitely general questions I think that would benefit our audience, but some of
Mhm.
them are selfishly just questions I've had since I was up at the front desk. And now I'm getting a chance to ask you them in an
There you
educational
go.
setting.
There you go. That's
So
funny.
thanks, Jonna. But so now my next question takes everything and kind of puts it in reverse. When a property is being sold from an IRA,
Right.
what's that process look like? How does that differ? How is it the same as the purchasing process? Can you talk about that a
Mhm.
little bit?
Sure. So it's actually the same process, right? So I decide, or the IRA owner decides to put the property up for sale. They get a bid. We'll do the same thing. We're going to sign off on those sales contracts. Hopefully, it goes through, and
Hmm.
then they will get the title company to draw up all the documents. We sign off. The buyer would sign off on the documents. Once it goes through, all those funds would then come back to the CamaPlan account, and the property is sold. Hopefully, the client made a nice profit on it. And yeah, the paperwork is basically the same, just like you said, in reverse order.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
And all the same
And
type of documents as we did for the purchase. It's going
mhm,
to be basically those same type of documents for a sale.
got it. And are all the same people involved? Is it kind of the same timeline and everything?
Yes. Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
What is there anything that happens? I guess I'm just wondering if you have you ever seen it happen when someone wants to put a property up for sale and it just isn't selling for a while, or is it typically there's someone waiting on the other end?
Uh, I've seen all different things. Right now, I think is a good time for property sales. So they seem to be,
Mhm.
you know, but yeah, it can happen either way. Hopefully, the sale goes through quickly for our clients' sake, but I have seen it, some deals fall through and there's nothing much you can do about that, right? But
Right.
yeah.
Got it. Well, I think, that kind of covers pretty much all the questions I've had. I don't know, is there anything else you think that people should know when it comes to purchasing real estate, especially younger investors or new investors who might not know exactly, what to expect or are thinking about purchasing that first property?
And no, I mean, basically, it is an investment. So if, sometimes people will find properties that are currently being rented and you're lucky enough to get them and the renter comes right in and you're making that income. At times, you may purchase the property and, you know, consider renting it out, but someone comes along and offers you a great deal on that, great. You could sell that and put that profit right back into your IRA within a couple of months if it happens that way. If they are real estate investors, I mean, we do get a lot of people that know all about real estate. They've done it personally. So when it comes to the IRA, they're very familiar with it. Obviously, there's like just that extra step in there because CAMA has to sign documents and things, but we do get a lot of people that are very familiar with purchasing real estate. So it's pretty easy for them to do it in the IRA because it's all the same steps. Again,
Mhm.
one added step, we add CamaPlan in there. But other than that, it's it's a great way to invest your IRA funds.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like, I mean, especially with the fact that you're able to, even if it's a percentage of it, if you can't
Right.
necessarily plan for all of it to go toward your retirement, and can only really put like maybe half or 75% of it
Right.
into an IRA, it sounds like it's, a very viable option for a lot of people to start young because, I've done in what I've seen, it's like real estate's obviously not that liquid of an asset. So it seems like it definitely is more of a, as much as it is hands off in your IRA, more of a hands on asset in general than,
Yes.
say, a note or even precious metals, that sort of thing. It's a little bit more tangible. So it sounds like it's a good vehicle, especially for like young people to get started in investing and saving and building wealth for toward that retirement age.
Right, right. And you're right. I mean, you have to be a little more hands-on with the real estate. With a note, it's basically you get the paperwork together, it pays you monthly maybe or annually, and there's not a lot of work with it. With the real estate, you do have to be on top of things because there are bills to be paid, there's renovations, you always have to be sure that your taxes are being paid, and then if obviously issues with tenants and paying or not paying. So you do have to be a little more hands-on, but it certainly can be beneficial to your IRA.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess to go off that question, I just love talking. I'm going to keep you here. um, but to go off that question, with it being an asset that's not necessarily, the most liquid, is it something that, you've seen a lot of investors choose to sell quicker or quickly as they approach retirement age, or is it something that, kind of it's open to anybody and it's not a young man's game? It all kind of depends. Or is it something that you've seen people really take a look at in terms of, where they're at in their investment journey?
Like you said, if you could get started early, and buy that property early and have it sitting in your IRA for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that would be great. As long as you're getting that rental income, you can't ask for anything more than that. Sometimes people do start a little bit later, but again, maybe they don't hold it that long. And
Mhm.
if it's a good market and someone's willing to pay, more money than what you purchased it for, great way to build your IRA account again. Sometimes people will also, and you are allowed to do this, you could have that property, purchase it through your IRA, and maybe take it as a distribution. So maybe you did want that home as a vacation home when you retire. So
Mhm.
you are allowed, obviously, you would pay the taxes when you do that, but you could certainly take portions. Maybe you'll do it over a period of 4 years and take portions of that property as a distribution each year. And in the end, you own it personally. So now you could use that as a vacation home in your retirement. So
Oh,
yeah.
that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe if you got
That's very
started a
cool.
little bit later in life, right, and then you held
Mhm.
it for 5 or 10 years, you're getting close to retirement, you could actually take that property as a distribution. Again, you're going to pay the taxes at that time, but that's,
Right.
that would be okay.
Awesome. Well, that's really cool. I mean, I definitely feel like I learned way more than I
Good
I
to hear
already
that.
knew about real estate just from this conversation. So yeah, thank you. I mean, I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you taking the time and breaking all this down for us, Donna. I think this is going to be very helpful for a lot of people, especially new investors that are starting out in real estate, might not know the process or thinking about maybe using it in terms of a vehicle for building retirement wealth. So one quick question before we do sign off is, how can people reach you if they have more questions? You are queen of the phones at Cama. So what's the best way for people to reach you?
So they can obviously call directly to our office, or you can always send emails over to operations@camaplan.com, and we'll help you through the process. Any documents that you have, send them over to us. We'll take a look and give you a call and go over what we need to get this real estate purchase ready for you.
Great. Thank you again. I miss you a lot. It's been nice to
I
talk to you,
know
Donna.
it has been nice talking to you too, Jess.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you.
And for those of you listening, feel free to tune in next week so you can hear more from our experts who have paved their roads to financial freedom. Or you can call CamaPlan today to learn more about how you can start to take control of your future wealth. Thanks, everyone. Thank you all for tuning into our podcast. We truly hope that you're enjoying your ride along the road to financial freedom so far. If you like what you've heard and learned, or if you want to hear more about certain topics that we may have already covered or have yet to cover, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. We would love to hear any feedback from you so that we may continue to make our podcast the best that it can be for you, our listeners. Thanks again, everyone, and remember, tune in next week to The Road to Financial Freedom.